My name's Matthew Lloyd and I run Survival School Bristol here in Tickenham in Bristol. So as part of this weekend, our wild camping weekend for 2019, we offered our visitors the opportunity to help us do a charcoal burn. And it's been interesting this year because it's a new kiln for us that we made up over the winter. So it's a slightly unusual kiln in that it's an octagonal shape rather than a round shaped kiln. So what we did is we got the guys and girls and the young boys and girls as well to come up, and we did a bit of an axe work session with them, worked on some axe safety and how to split round wood safely. And then they went off and they spent about an hour splitting up some nice rounds of ash and some bits of oak for us. And then we loaded the kiln up. The process is that we're basically cooking wood with heat from the fire within the kiln, and we're cooking that wood to drive off moisture within the wood as well as volatiles. And what that essentially does is it leaves us with pure lumps of carbon, which we can then use in our blacksmithing courses, that we can use for barbecues when we're having community barbecues up here as part of the Brown Rock Woodland project. So when we do charcoal burns, it's quite a long-winded process. First of all, we either have to cut wood as part of our coppicing cycle here and allow that wood to season for maybe about a year to get the moisture content down. And then we have the time needed to cut the wood up, and we're ideally looking for something between kind of that size and that kind of size, because we expect about 20% shrinkage on the wood. So we need to have bits of wood that aren't so small that they kind of shrink down into nothing. And then once you've lit the kiln, you've got about 30 minutes of free burning time, and then depending on how much moisture is left within the wood, will depend on the length of your burn as well as the size of the kiln as well. But with our size kiln, we expect about 8 hours to drive off all the moisture. The process is basically we're going to load the kiln up. We're going to create air slots at the bottom so that when we light the kiln, we're getting as much air into there as possible so that we're getting the maximum amount of heat. And after a period of free burning, we're going to shut the air out of the kiln in the majority of the places. We're going to allow air to come in through the vents, which are the feet. We're going to add exhaust pipes so that we have air coming in and then smoke coming out through the exhausts. And then we'll let that burn for about 3 hours before we switch the exhausts over so that the inlets become the outlets. And we'll let that burn then until the white smoke clears. So we'll see coming out of the chimneys, we'll get all this white smoke, and when you put your hand in it, it feels damp to the touch. And then when that white smoke becomes clear, we're going to shut the kiln down completely, take all of the oxygen away from it, and let the kiln cool down. And hopefully, fingers crossed, when we open the kiln up, we'll be left with nice big lumps of charcoal that we can use for other things. Traditionally though, charcoal burning was done by people who lived within the woods all year round, and then it might be them, it might be other people, but throughout the winter when the leaves are off the tree, you coppice things like your hazel and your willow and your sweet chestnut, and any of the wood that's too big to be used to make furniture or beam poles and bits and pieces like that then goes into the charcoal burning process. So the idea is you cut your wood 1 year in a coop, you leave it to season for a year. The next year in the winter you cut your next coop, but in the springtime and the summer you use the wood from that original coop to do your charcoal burn, so it's seasoned for a year. And traditionally charcoal burners used earth kilns, which were really known as earth clamps. And what you would do is you'd create a stack of firewood, normally in the round. You'd cover that in sods of earth, so you'd cut up turf and the top layer of the soil and use that to cover the wood almost completely. And then you'd do exactly what we did. You'd light the wood, get the heat up, and then once the heat was up, you'd completely seal off that mound of wood with earth, so that you were blocking the air out using earth rather than what we're doing, which is using the steel kiln. The problem with earth clamps though is they need constant maintenance. So whereas we're able to go off and have a cup of tea, what you need with an earth clamp is you need someone to sit there constantly watching it, because as the fire breaks out through the turf, you need to be constantly filling those holes to stop oxygen getting in. And a useful little tool that was made by charcoal burners was the one-legged stool. So a one-legged stool allows you to sit down and rest your legs, but if you fall asleep while sitting on the stool, you'll fall over and then wake yourself up so you can get back in and start keep managing the kiln.